Hello! This is the first video from WitchTriadHarbalism. This is an endeavor to understand Shakespeare's Macbeth through study of magical herbalism. In my study of Shakespeare's Macbeth, I found a great pathway for my personal interests to take a front seat in interpreting the text. Not only am I a theater major, but I'm also a Shakespeare Studies minor in college, and I am also a pagan, so I practice what most people would consider witchcraft and what I consider witchcraft. This video is going to give you a crash course, little one, in herbalism, magic, social deviance, and the feminine in Elizabethan England. As a person that highly values the cultural significance of Shakespeare's work throughout the years, that's from the time it was written up until now, because it's timeless work, really, I've noticed that often to certain audiences in present day, the significance of the cauldron scene in Act 4, Scene 1 of Macbeth can get lost in the spectacle. I mean, there's witches on stage, there's a cauldron, there might be really cool lights, and so, yeah, they're practicing magic, and they're doing really scary stuff, but we don't really get what the words mean or what the significance is for the rest of the play, because this is a crucial scene and ties in with lots of characters and their stories and their plot lines, and it's just really, really, really important. So through my research of this scene, I've discovered that many of the ingredients that are placed into the cauldron during that ritual correspond to folk names of herbs and plants, and that's where the concept of magical herbalism comes into play. You might be asking, what is magical herbalism? Why do we need to know about it? It's the concept that herbs, plants, trees have magical associations, meanings, and uses. For example, mint. It's a little floppy, but it smells really good. Mint. Mint, or menthe from the mentha family, is most commonly associated with the folk name garden mint, because it's basic mint. It's also associated with the planet Mercury, the element of air. Associated deities are Pluto and Hecate. Hecate gets summoned in the spell, cauldron scene. In Wiccan tradition, mint's powers, so that means what you could use mint for in a spell or ritual, are money, lust, healing, travel, exorcism, and protection. Its common uses are in healing, and so you could take a piece of mint and rub it against the forehead to relieve a headache. And there's lots of other uses for mint. Magical herbalism is based upon relationships of power. The concept being that everything holds power and energy, and one who believes in that power and energy can utilize that power for their own needs in rituals. So that's pretty cool. Taking into consideration that mint can be used for healing, it's easy to say that there are many more herbs that can be used in healing as well. I mean, it's not just mint. You've got to have stuff for other uses too. So some of these herbs that can be used in healing as well are adder's tongue, burdock, cedar, dock, eucalyptus, figwort, garlic, hemp, ivy, lime, myrrh, olive, pine, rose, saffron, and violet. That's to name several, but it's definitely not all of the things that can be used in healing and in herbal remedies. We have to consider what kind of healing and what kind of herbal remedies were used in Shakespeare's time. So Shakespeare took inspiration often from current issues and themes present in pop culture in his time. Is it possible that Shakespeare had knowledge of herbal remedies and magical herbalism? Definitely. Herbal remedies would have been used in healing and midwifery, and sometimes midwives would be persecuted for those charms associated with aiding a woman in childbearing. So here's a quote from Jennifer A. Heise's article, Women and Medicine in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Midwives were not infrequently prosecuted in church courts for providing charms either to assist the mother in childbirth or pregnancy or to encourage conception. Such practices made them more vulnerable to persecution during the witch craze. However, before 1400, such practices, if overtly Christian, superstitious, or magical behavior, were dealt with less harshly. Robin Briggs, in Witches and Neighbors, asserts that midwives were generally not persecuted as witches. But that's not saying that all midwives were safe. Like, we have to consider that. The witch trials lasted for almost 4 centuries. 4 centuries. And over 100,000 people were tried, convicted, and executed as witches, most of them being women. We have to think about and analyze why most of the persecuted women as witches were executed, and why there were more women than men that were executed for witchcraft. So here's an excerpt from Demonology in form of a dialogue by King James I. So King James was in his reign during the time that Shakespeare wrote Macbeth. And King James was obsessed with witchcraft. He wrote this book called Demonology, and he just was really, really interested in the craft. And so here's an excerpt from his book. Philomaths. What can be the cause that there are 20 women give to the craft where there is 1 man? Epistemon. The reason is easy, for as that sex is frailer than man is, so it is easier to be entrapped in those gross snares of the devil, as was overwell proved to be true by the serpent's deceiving of Eve at the beginning. From this text, we see a statistic being used during King James I's time, stating that there's 1 man persecuted for witchcraft to every 20 women persecuted for the same crime. The main reason that's given for this is that women are of a weaker sex, and they also throw in a reference to the Holy Bible and the forbidden fruit, the snake that deceives Eve into eating the forbidden fruit. So, what does this have to say about our herbalists and midwives? Well, that they could be accused of witchcraft and could be killed for it because they're practicing some sort of magic by giving charms and herbal remedies to expecting mothers or women who want to become pregnant. Great. So, let's get back to the text, shall we? The next question is, in what way can herbalism, magic, and femininity be perceived in Shakespearean text, specifically Macbeth? The witches in Macbeth set some sort of example for viewing herbalism and magic from a standpoint that's outside of my own pro-magic standpoint. And the women of this play in general tell us a great deal about social deviance in Tudor England. What we know about the kind of culture Shakespeare lived in can give us some kind of standards for what an ideal woman was like in this period. Let me give you a shortened, condensed version. An ideal woman in Tudor England can have and or has children, preferably sons. Let's get real. Preferably sons. Displays motherly and feminine qualities, and is obedient and subservient to her husband / father / any man above her social status. That's the idea of the typical good wife in Shakespearean time. From the actual text of Macbeth, I see 1 woman that actually fulfills this description. That's Lady Macduff. Lady Macduff has children, is obedient and subservient to her husband, and displays motherly and feminine qualities. Lady Macduff sets the socially acceptable standard for women in this play, which, of no doubt, is why her husband, spoiler alert, kills Macbeth. Beheads him. Yeah. On the other and complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have the witches. These beings are really socially deviant. Firstly, because they practice magic. They conjure, invoke, prophecy, etc. These are the witches that were feared in Elizabethan England. They had terrible power. They were scary. Their deviancy falls outside the set list of social ideas in these ways. They obey no man. I don't believe they take direct orders really from anyone, except perhaps the devil, as would have been viewed in Tudor England. I mean, come on. Yeah, you get it. But who says the devil has a gender anyway, or if there is a devil? And then the witches display masculine qualities, namely beards, as stated by Banquo in Act 1, Scene 3, and this is what he says. You seem to understand me by each at once her chappy finger laying upon her skinny lips. You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so. So, it's entirely possible that these women just had a medical condition that made them grow beards, because that's a thing. But they display masculine qualities. They're not overtly feminine, as stated in the text. Then, floating somewhere in the middle of the spectrum is Lady Macbeth. Her social deviance borders on the brink between normalcy and witchcraft. Not only does she in Act 1, Scene 5 invoke spirits, but she also calls upon them to unsex her, which would make her unfeminine. She calls upon them to block the opening to her womb and offers up her breast milk as payment, which expresses social deviance of a whole interesting sort. It's very, very fascinating to me. So, this is what she says in that scene. The raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe-top full of direst cruelty. Make thick my blood. Stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose, nor keep peace between the effect and it. Come to my woman's breasts, and take my milk for gall, you murdering ministers, wherever in your sightless substances you wait on nature's mischief. Wow. She defies expectations of femininity and gender presentation. Next, she breaks down the expectation of subservience to her husband. Throughout the play, she displays a cunning ability to exert her power over her husband, to amplify his ambitions. Lastly, Lady Macbeth has no children, and expresses in Act 1, Scene 7 a striking lack of motherly affection. So, she says, I have given suck, and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums, and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this. This quote definitely displays her lack of motherly affection, but also makes a very interesting claim. It claims that Lady Macbeth has given birth in the past and nursed her child, but there's a lot of emphasis on the Macbeth's inability to reproduce, and that Macbeth has no heir. I think I know why this paradox exists. So, finally, we've come full circle, back to magical herbalism and back to the cauldron scene. In the very first few lines, we find the first ingredient that corresponds to an herb used in magic: poisoned entrails. Now, the term poisoned entrails might, on surface value, evoke images of human guts, someone's been poisoned, disemboweled, and their insides used as ingredients in a spell. Ugh, right? Well, perhaps that idea is wrong, and the poisoned entrails going into the cauldron are an herb. A synonym of the word entrails is organs, and the word organs correlates to one of the many folk names of the herb pennyroyal. Pennyroyal is from the mentha or mint family. It's kind of floppy still. Its powers and spells are for strength, protection, and peace, but the most interesting thing about pennyroyal is that its oil is not to be ingested by a pregnant individual, because in high enough doses, it's an abortifacient. So, how does this connect to Lady Macbeth? It's not entirely impossible that Lady Macbeth, in a desire to be unsexed, used pennyroyal oil to abort any potential children. Perhaps she did give birth to a child that she failed to abort and was unable to deal with that fact, and as a result, perhaps she killed her baby, and it was covered up. It's possible that Lady Macbeth is buried in self-created illusions that allow her to forget her crime of infanticide, and that makes her fall outside the social norm. Regardless, Lady Macbeth is intricately tied to the witches in the ways that they deviate from social norms, and this spell ingredient may even connect them further. So, well, we're all out of time for this video, but please like and subscribe. Follow me on Tumblr at WitchTriadHarbalism.tumblr.com, and stay tuned for further analysis of the cauldron scene in Macbeth.